Daniel, I'm curious. You have a lifetime of work that you've done research and that you have pulled together that brings people to hearing the language of their deep self. And it's moved into accessing deep core language and deep core codes. And I'm wondering what you see about your work and what people can truly access and how that relates to or engages the level of presence and leadership that is needed in the world today. Because we don't have just business challenges or political challenges or cultural challenges. We actually have civilizational level challenges now. How does that, how do you see that engaging or connecting up?
The conversation about what what's the core for an individual, for an organization, uh, the why anything, why as a person, why this organization, what are we doing, what are we serving, so the why are we here, why am I here, what are we called to do, who are we in the manner of this, speaks to a certain kind of inquiry about the core of who I am, who we are, who the organization is, what we're about. So that is in the culture at large, when we say mission, vision, purpose, that speaks to a deeper level of inquiry that says at the core of the person and the organization, why do we make the decisions we make? And in terms of the civilizational crossroads that you were referring to in this time of great transition and upheaval, where there's a reexamination of the way we do things and who we are in the matter that isn't, that's rapidly not really entirely in our hands anymore. As AI becomes more integrated into the systems and we have agents making decisions outside of our instruction, if you will, like on their own. There's a movement to, instead of calling it artificial intelligence, calling it alien intelligence. Alien as in non-human. So at a time when we have acceleration of this other kind of intelligence that's making decisions outside of our instruction or even purview, and at this fulcrum point, a question of stewardship. How are we deciding? We meaning few people. How are we deciding, humans, um, what to do about how we will be in relationship with this other kind of intelligence and how that affects the impetus for civilization as we know it and as it's wanting to be? And do we have a conversation of what wants to happen? So then the question that what you're referring to then is if we're not having that inquiry about at the core, what are we about? At the core, what wants to happen? At the level of foundation, in its essence, in our essence, what are we up to? If we're not having that conversation, there's no self-correctiveness, no self-directed measure, no reference point that we find ourselves dealing with the consequence after the fact, which is perhaps one of the reasons we're in the meta crisis. That there's not a lot of forethought, if you will. It's just okay. We're not saying what could go wrong. We often say that humorously. Here's what we're doing. What could go wrong? While we're experiencing what went wrong because we didn't have that inquiry. So the vision, mission, purpose conversation, however you label that, is making the time, making the effort to have that inquiry, to be clear about the why, what, and who. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? Who are we in the matter, and what is that calling us to do, and what's the future that wants to happen? That's the core code conversation that really, really needs to happen.
So without engaging or learning what it is to hear those deep core codes and to work with them for a future that wants to happen, we could miss what we actually need to go to work on the challenges, the meta crisis level of challenge that are in front of us. And business remains largely extractive and growth dependent. And the innovations tend to be more technological, as they have been for at least 2 centuries, or a century and a half. What you're pointing to about the deep core codes could actually open us or help us have a different level of awareness and a different structure of thinking, that we can scale up different solutions, different ways to address what it is that we're facing, because we've never been present to a civilizational level challenge, meaning human beings could go extinct given what's in front of us with the meta crisis. And it's also possible that we could create a U-turn to that. The question is, how could deep core codes help us do that and be aware of what we need to be aware of and present to what we need to be present to come together to make something different happen, rather than just more of the same technological innovation that's gotten us where we are, both good and bad.
It might start with the organizational principles that as information is moved through the different civilizations, the organizing principles will be myth as in blueprint, the story of the myth, as organized us hunter-gatherer moving to agricultural, moving to industrial, moving to information age, moving to imaginal age. Different myths as blueprint, stories as blueprint has been the organizing principle for collecting networks of power and people.
Sure.
Without this conversation about what's the core code, meaning what's the blueprint story, we often find ourselves being organized by something outside of ourselves, or we find ourselves being carried by someone else's organizing principle, story, code. And as the codes for another kind of intelligence is moving to create the blueprint for us, where you now find that trillions of dollars are being invested every day to capture our attention, to integrate, install, make part of us a story that various, let's say, enterprises would like us to integrate, take on as our core code, our story that organizes us. Who's deciding the networks that you are making yourself part of, and why? What's the core code myth blueprint within any one of us that has us decide how we will make those decisions about who we will join with? And then as a leader in business, what are the decisions you're making about the story, myth/blueprint of your enterprise, and for what, so that what, in lines with what's the future that needs to happen for the turning into the fourth turning, some people would say, into the spring of the new civilization. What will that be?
Yeah.
And so the main, in terms of what you're talking about, then as a person, as an enterprise, as a leader, having the conversation about what's your core code that you're leading from and what's the core code your enterprise is leading from, that becomes the fundamental organizing foundational principle. for who you will be in the matter, in the world.